The following is a special presentation on AZTV 7.
Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. This AZTV special program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2022 midterm election. We'll be talking with candidates and data analysts to give you insight into who and what is on the ballot. Today, we'll be talking with the candidates for Superintendent of Public Instruction. Before we move on, I want to clarify the job of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. This is a very important position in Arizona public schools, setting policy for the school districts and policy and plans in place for the districts at large. The first candidate we're going to talk to is Tom Horn. He's the Republican candidate. And then we will be speaking with the incumbent Democrat candidate, Kathy Hoffman. Later on in the show, Mike Noble, OH Predictive Insights, will join us with our Tracking Arizona segment. This week, we'll be looking at what voters in Arizona and where they stand on gun laws. So I want you to stick around. We'll be back here with Before You Vote in exactly 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining me right now is Republican candidate for Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Horn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be back with you.
Kind of a unique situation for you because normally when there's an incumbent running, that the person that's opposing them is not experienced in the office, but this is actually an office you held for a while.
For 8 years. And then I was Arizona Attorney General. Now I'm running for Superintendent of Schools again. My friends are telling me I'm going backwards, but my response is no, the big problems in the schools now, that's really what I want to work on. So
let's start there. How has the office changed since you held it to what the challenges are now for the next superintendent?
Yeah, when I was superintendent, I was focused almost exclusively on academics, get the kids to learn more, get them to show it on their test scores. And when I left office, we had 60% of the kids proficient in math and over 70% in reading. Now they're at like 43% for each category. And I think, and this is even before COVID. And my criticism of the current superintendent is her focus is not on academics, it's on a lot of other things, critical race theory and sexual stuff, but not on academics. And it shows, you know, the leader sets the tone for everything. So one of the reasons I'm running is I'm very upset about the kids who are learning less, and I want to turn that around and get the focus back on academics.
So then I think it's a good clarification. Is it about how bad like CRT is or social emotional learning, or is it more about we've shifted focus from academics to some of these other curriculums? Which is the thrust?
It's both.
Okay.
It's the shift of focus. It's not on academics anymore. And when we talk about critical race theory, we're talking about something which I consider to be very immoral, because I believe that we're all brothers and sisters under the skin. You know, we're all individuals, and race is irrelevant to anything. And in critical race theory, they emphasize to kids the importance of their race, and it's very divisive. It's a step backwards to the Old South. I'm very, very much against it. And the sexual stuff is shocking. I mean, on her official website, there's something called Queer Chat, in which young children are brought in by things like Pokemon, and then they're talking to volunteers who are not properly, you know, they're not licensed, they're not professionals, and it's an opportunity to groom them, and they have to give a lot of information about themselves. So if somebody hacks it, puts it on the dark web and be sold to people who want to be predators.
Let's talk about a couple of things that have developed since you were in the office that have become big issues.
Yes.
One of them is school security.
Yeah.
A lot of money allocated by the state for school security. What would your vision be in how that money is used in school security?
It's not new for me. When I was superintendent, I lobbied very hard to get enough money for a policeman in every school. I think it's very important to protect the kids. So some maniac invades the way they did in Texas, it could happen here. There's somebody to protect them. And also, they become friendly with the kids, so the kids learn to trust them rather than view them as pigs or enemies or something like that. So I've always advocated for that. Then when I was Attorney General, I offered a program whereby principals could send somebody to us, hopefully somebody with like a retired policeman or retired military that was a teacher, and we would give them training for free. We wouldn't charge for it. And then they could have a gun locked up in a safe place, and they'd be there to protect the students. We needed authorization from that, and all the Democrats voted against it, and some Republicans voted against it. And the Democrats were saying, we want our schools to be gun-free. Well, if you say my school is gun-free, what you're really saying is, come get me, I have no protection. These kids have to have protection from a maniac coming into their school with a gun.
You alluded to Texas, to Uvalde, Texas.
Yes.
Recently in El Mirage, I believe it was, an elementary school had a lockdown situation. Parents justifiably fearful, trying to get onto school grounds. Parents were arrested. And in talking with law enforcement, what I was told was there needs to be better communication between the school, the parents, and law enforcement. How do you make that communication happen so that if something happens in a critical incident, everybody knows the plan and is confident in it?
You have to anticipate. Remember, the first big shooting was in Colorado.
Sure.
And at that time, I served on a school board. I served on a school board for 24 years, 10 years as its president. And as soon as we heard about that, we started training and communicating. And you have to do that in advance, not when the problem happens.
The other thing that's come out that's been a big switch in schools that is just going to start happening when the next superintendent, whether it's the incumbent or yourself, is the expansion of the ESA programs, what people know as the voucher programs.
Yes.
How do you think this is going to affect public schools, and what do you think is the most effective way to use this program?
Well, my view is competition's always better for everyone. That's why the capitalist system produces prosperity and the socialist system produces poverty. Because competition makes people do better. And there are studies that show that public district schools do better academically if they have competition. And I experienced that myself. When I was on the school board, I would get calls from people who were unhappy, and I would say, you know, you can go to a charter school that had just come out at the time, and the state will pay for it. And they were happier, and I was happier because they stopped calling me. But I'll give you an example of how it improves quality. In negotiations, teachers would say, we want to eliminate advanced placement classes because they're smaller than other classes, because not that many kids qualify, so they're inefficient and there'd be more money for our salaries. And my response was, if you do that, you lose your best students to the charter schools, and that stopped that discussion. So competition makes everybody perform much better.
So the last question then is about the criticism of the expansion of this program. It says that there's lack of oversight of the dollars. How do you offset that argument? Well,
there was an amendment proposed to do that, to have accountability. It failed, so the legislature, the elected people in the legislature, they make that decision, and I will implement it the way they passed it, you know, trying to make it successful as best I can. If I see things that need to be tweaked, I'll be transparent about it, and I'll indicate to the legislature what things I think need to be tweaked if that appears to be the case.
This is obviously a very important race, and more people are paying attention to schools now than ever before since COVID and people at-home learning. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate you coming down and discussing the issues, and I look forward to maybe having you come back and talk more, because as people are finding out more about where each candidate stands, they have to make a wise choice, because this is a very important job. So I appreciate you coming down and telling us where you stand on the issues.
Well, as you know from our prior interviews, I'm always happy to come down anytime you want me. I'll be here. You just snap your fingers and I'll be here.
Thank you very much. That's Tom Horn. He's a Republican candidate for Superintendent of Public Instruction. As we always say, just be an informed voter. That's the purpose of this show. So thanks again to Mr. Horn. We'll be back here in a moment on Before You Vote. Coming up, we're looking at where Arizona voters stand on gun laws and if they believe it will help deter mass shootings. Plus, later in the show, I sit down with Superintendent of Public Instruction incumbent Kathy Hoffman. Find out how she believes she can help Arizona schools. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. Joining us once again is Mike Noble, Chief of Research from OH Predictive Insights. Welcome back, Mike.
Thanks for having me back, Mike.
This week, I want to talk about gun control and people's feelings about more gun control laws here in Arizona. How does this play out?
You know, it's interesting. Gun control, when you look at Arizonans' opinions among the registered voters here, is that they're actually very much split. And for us being a historically very pro-gun state, there's actually a plurality, or a little bit more, that are saying that they are actually for more stricter gun laws than less restrictive gun laws, which is kind of interesting.
What's interesting about that chart, too, for me, is that even split with independents. I mean, 44-43, that's a dead tie, that they are equally for and against.
100%. This is one of those issues that it is absolutely split. There's really no side really has too much of an advantage. And where you're seeing that difference is that Democrats are just a little bit more pro-restrictive guns, where Republicans, they have a little bit of leakage on their side of being wanting less restrictions.
And that question about whether or not gun control laws will shift, will stop some of these mass shootings. But when the questions are asked about age demographics, let's say under 21 years old being able to buy a gun, how big of a role does that part of it play into those laws they're talking about?
Yeah, when we asked a myriad of different gun laws or policies, is that we saw that, when it comes to, like, background checks on guns or enforcing the current laws on the books, very strong. But also when you look at the age split of moving the age from 18 to 21 to purchase a firearm. So whether it's purchasing a regular firearm or just doing that for only the high capacity or kind of the assault rifle style, both those equally, vast majority of voters are very much in favor for that. Where they kind of split or start getting a little more dicey on the issue is that when you talk about arming teachers or banning high capacity magazines or guns, you see that there's a bit more of a split. But for a lot of the gun laws, Arizonans are actually very much in favor of approving.
And it's interesting because Arizona's got the most lenient gun laws in the entire country, and these are Arizona voters that are saying this. Does that surprise you a little bit?
Not really, because what we're seeing is that over the years, as these terrible shootings that have happened across the country, is that every time this happens, it really brings this issue up to debate. And where you see that voters that are kind of a little bit more on board with this, or especially those that have children under 18 years of age living at home. So when you see these shootings at schools, as a parent, and even myself as a parent, you're sitting there like, you may want to do something about it. So it becomes kind of a very emotional issue, but I'm not surprised with it given the events that have happened over the last 4 years or so.
I love the way you break it down, not just what the answers are, but why. This is a great graph, so I appreciate you doing it again.
Oh, thanks for having me, and I appreciate it, Mike.
All right, that's Mike Noble with OH Predictive Insights. We'll be back here in just a moment on Before You Vote. Find out how Superintendent of Public Instruction Kathy Hoffman believes she can help Arizona schools. I sit down with her next on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. This week, we talk with candidates for Superintendent of Public Instruction. The incumbent is Kathy Hoffman. She joins us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with, you've been in this job now for almost a full term. What are the most important issues moving forward for the state of Arizona from your perspective?
So the top one continues to be teacher recruitment and retention, because we know for every child in the state how important it is for them to have a teacher who is highly trained, highly effective, and experienced, and can also manage classroom sizes upwards of 20, 30 kids in a classroom. That takes a lot of skill and professionalism, so that continues to be one of my highest priorities.
So let's go in that direction first. There is a program out there for mentoring, much like a doctor goes through an internship. How is that being received, and do you think this is going to be a key piece of that retention?
Yes, definitely. So our teacher residency program is new to Arizona. It's going to be a new pathway to recruit people who already have their bachelor's degree but are seeking a new career in teaching, and they receive training right there on the spot with mentoring, and then they will be mentored as well after they finish that program and graduating with their master's degree from NAU. So this is another fantastic way for real life experience and real strong mentoring for new teachers.
And you know that in any job, but especially in teaching, what you anticipate and then what you actually see in the classroom be two different things. Right. So to be able to bounce off of an experienced teacher some of the things you're going through has got to be an invaluable piece.
Exactly, and we do have larger classroom sizes, and as well as children who have a lot of emotional needs and a lot of challenges. So we want to make sure that our teachers are learning on the job, getting that real life experience, so that they are successful going forward.
So after what happened in Uvalde, Texas, and other schools. We know that school security has been on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. There's been a big call for upgraded security, school resource officers, and a lot of money put there. What do you think needs to happen with school security? How is that best handled?
Well, I feel like just like everyone, when I think about these questions, it's so emotional, and I'm a new mom. My daughter is now 9 months old, and so when I think about these issues about school safety, I think for all of us, it's deeply personal and scary. And we see those like Uvalde and the other school shootings nationwide. It's heartbreaking, and so I just have to start the conversation there. When I started back in 2019 in this position, I launched the School Safety Task Force, knowing that this was a top issue. That was right after Parkland. With the work of the task force, the task force together created a model school safety plan, which we've continued to bump out to our school leaders, make sure they know that's a resource for them. One of the recommendations from the task force was for there to be a statewide tip line for school safety specifically. That has never been funded to this day, so we continue to advocate for more funding in that area. Another area that we've been investing in is our school safety grant program. Through the school safety grant programs, school districts and charters can apply for either, they select on their own, either an SRO, student resource officer, a school counselor, or a social worker. And so what I like about this is that it's up to the school community to decide what positions they're applying for. And we want to make sure that we have the funding for these types of programs. And I do have to say our legislature made a really good step just a few months ago at the end of this last legislative session. They added an additional $50 million for the school safety grant program, so that's only going to help our schools with their school safety needs.
One piece of that, though, now is communication. After what happened in El Mirage, understanding the parents' point of view of wanting to make sure their children were safe, but the police also having to control a situation. How do you fix that communication gap between law enforcement, the schools, and the parents?
That was such a terrifying situation for those parents to get that notification. They're thinking about Uvalde. They're very worried about, do I need to step in myself to save my kid's life? I mean, it's horrifying to think of what those parents were going through, and then also thinking about, on the law enforcement side, what they need to do to make sure that the whole school and whole situation is safe for everyone. So I do think that communication's everything in those types of situations, and there needs to be planning ahead of time. What is the school safety plan? What is the communication from law enforcement, making sure they are in strong communication with the school leaders, and that ultimately the families are receiving updates, very timely updates, and that they know exactly where they should be standing and what they should be doing to make sure, again, that it's all about keeping everyone safe in that situation.
Another big change moving forward is going to be the expansion of the ESAs, the Empowerment Scholarship Accounts. What is going to happen with that? What do you think this will look like, and what would you ideally like to be seen now that this has been implemented?
Well, it's not implemented yet.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. It's going to be implemented.
So the law takes effect in September, and so if it takes effect in September, then one of my big concerns is that is the lack of accountability for the system, and I will explain what I mean by that. So for our districts and charters that are responsible for educating our kids in Arizona, of course, they are held to very high standards in terms of the statewide assessments, in terms of what kids are learning. They're held to audits in terms of exactly where each of our tax dollars is going, as well as the teachers have to be certified. They have to be fingerprint clearance checked, again, back to school safety being such a high concern and having highly trained teachers. So with the ESA voucher program, we just don't have any of those accountability measures in place. Students are not required to be taught by a certified teacher. There's no assessment requirement, so we have literally no idea how those kids are doing. And over half of the participants of the program currently are kids with special needs. And so I really worry about when we don't have a check of the system to make sure kids are learning, kids are progressing, kids are safe. That's where my concerns lie. And I'll give you a quick example. I was just up in Snowflake, Arizona, and I met with community members there, and they said there was a school in our community that was serving, it was a private school serving kids with autism and funded through the ESA program. That school closed with no notice to families. It completely shut down. All those kids with autism returning back to other, whether it's the public schools or other local schools, and there was no accountability for that. owners could just close their doors and say, we're done, we're leaving, and that school closed.
Well, all of these issues are going to play a big role in who we elect, whether it's to re-elect the incumbent or another superintendent. So I appreciate you coming down to talk about the issues, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about this, because I think this is one of the most important offices in the state, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mike.
Kathy Hoffman is the Democrat candidate and incumbent superintendent of public instruction. Be an informed voter. Make sure you know who you're voting for and why. We'll be back in a moment on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. I want to thank our Superintendent of Public Instruction candidates, the incumbent Democrat Kathy Hoffman and the Republican challenger Tom Horn. I also want to thank Mike Noble for joining us with a great conversation about gun laws in Arizona. Important conversations happen on this show. We want informed voters. That's been the goal ever since we started this, so that whoever you vote for in all of these races, you have information to know you're going to the polls voting for the right person in your mind. You can head over to aztv.com/vote. You'll find links to other voter resources. Next week, we're talking with the nominees for Attorney General. The Democrat in that race is Chris Mays, and the Republican is Abraham Hamadeh. He is the Trump-endorsed candidate. We'll be breaking down their campaign for office and hearing where they stand on the issues. It's an important race, as all of these are. We'll have a great discussion with them next week beginning at 4:30. So make sure you join us then, right here on Before You Vote.